finished Florence. Flow. Pasture. What does that sound like?
Pasteurization.
You're so smart. Did you read it? Oh, no. Pasteur. So this guy, Louis Pasteur, known as the father of microbiology. What would microbiology mean?
Study germ.
Not necessarily, but part of it, yes. Micro means small. Logi means study of. Okay, and bio means life. So the literal meaning of microbiology is study of small life. His germ theory proved that microorganisms cause disease. We came up with this idea that it's contagious, that germs or microorganisms are actually what cause the disease. Right? Proved that heat can be used to destroy germs through a process of pasteurization. Now, it's much more, the process this day and age is, there's more to it than just heating, I'm sure, but maybe not. I don't really know much about it, but I'm sure it's not as simplified as just adding and just boiling it and being done. But he came up with that. He tested it before. How many microorganisms were there? Heated it and looked at it after. So very significant discovery there. Created a vaccine for rabies. And that's not a regular vaccine you get, but you have to have, if you guys ever get bit by a wild animal, I'm not sure if it's rabbit or not, go on, especially if it's like a bat or a skunk or something else that you know frequently carries rabies. Raccoons, what else? Skunks and raccoons, possum. Something that you're not sure. They're really aggressive or something. They're usually scared of you, but they're really aggressive. Or maybe something else going on. But you have to get that first shot within 24 hours for it to work. So you want to be seen as soon as you need to. And there's like around 5 shots that you get. I had to. When I was in Ethiopia, that was so far away. I mean, that was like a 2-day trip from any kind of civilization, what I felt like civilization, And so I had to get the first 3 rabies shots before I left. So just in case I got bit by something, it would give me time to get to wherever I needed to go. And they hurt. Those hurt. But he also founded the basic rules for sterilization. What's sterilization?
The process of making something.
Yeah, it's cleaning, right? It's getting rid of all of the bacteria on it. Think about up to this time, they were still doing surgeries, right? They were still doing procedures on people, but they didn't start sterilizing tools until this guy came up with it. Kind of disturbing to think about. Like using tools on one person and going on to the next person. Grosses me out. Joseph Lister, I think Listerine, right? Used carbolic acid on wounds to kill germs. I'm sure that didn't feel very good, but figured out that we need to kill the germs in the wound so that they don't get infected and get worse. First doctor to use an antiseptic in surgery. Volunteer, Clara Barton. The most significant thing about Clara Barton, I would say, is that she formed the American Red Cross. You still use that? I mean, that's still in effect today. Volunteer nurse for wounded soldiers during the Civil War. She came up with this record-keeping system of keeping up with the missing soldiers. And then campaigned for the USA to sign the Treaty of Geneva, which said that they would care for the sick, regardless of the sign. Robert Koch developed the culture plate method to identify pathogens. So what that means, like a petri dish, like this thing down here, has this like sugary medium in it. It's kind of like a gel that they put in there, and it's sterile. Doesn't have anything in it whenever you first get it. But you take blood, trying to culture something. Means you're trying to grow bacteria out of it. So you take blood or urine, whatever it is. You sputum. Take, if they have a wound and you can't figure out why it's not getting better, they might swab the wound. And then they take that Q-tip and they swab it in that petri dish and then stick it in an incubator for 24, 48 hours. Usually 48 hours minimum. And then they take it back out. And if it's got something growing on it, hey, kind of like that does, bacteria, then they swab it, put it on a slide, and look at it under the microscope and see if they, to see what it is. And then they can determine what medication to give. Some medicines work on some bacteria and some don't. So another really significant discovery that allowed us to know what kind of diseases people have, what kind of bacteria they're infected with, and how we can treat it. He also isolated the bacteria that causes tuberculosis. Willem Röntgen discovered röntgenograms, or X-rays. What does X-ray stand for?
Unknown.
Unknown, right? He didn't really know what it was. So he let doctors see inside the body, right? They could see bones. Now, obviously, their X-rays then were not going to look the same as ours. A long way, right? But what did his wife say? You remember that from the video? I have seen. Yeah, she said, I've seen my own death. Right? Probably did freak her out a little bit. You think until that point, skeletons were like an evil thing that were very, people that was just associated with death. And so to see that, it would be kind of freaky to see that. The Industrial Revolution, 18th and 19th century, John Snow investigated cholera outbreaks and determined that the disease was caused by sewage getting into the water. No, obviously if your sewage runs into your well, your drinking water, it's going to make you sick. But cholera is usually a waterborne infection, and it's pretty severe. You'll hear, sometimes if you go to the CDC or something, you'll hear about cholera outbreaks still in other areas of the world. And that's either from people not washing their, going to the bathroom and then not washing their hands before they prepare somebody's food, or, sewage water, wastewater getting into the drinking supply. Also really disturbing to think about. I had a girl, when I was in Ethiopia, there was a girl, she was probably 14 or 15, came in, and we determined that she had cholera, but probably tuberculosis as well. We treated her for both, but cholera, man, intense nausea, vomiting, diarrhea. She weighed probably 70 pounds. And just tiny, you could just see all of her bones in her arms and her legs. She was so thin. And really out of it by the time that they came to us. So it has some devastating effects for sure. Very, very dehydrated. Joseph Lister, again, we've already talked about him, but first one to disinfect, sterilization, and hands during surgery. Okay, so we're talking less than 200 years ago, these things were started, like way less than 200 years ago, right? Pretty crazy to think about. 20th century, so really increased the knowledge about the role of blood in the body. I figured out that we have blood types, type A, type B, and type O. And those are significant because you can only take certain types of blood. You can't just take everybody's. Sometimes I'll talk about that later. Find out how white blood cells protect against disease. That's part of your immune system, right? Your white blood cells attack the other bacteria or foreign things in the body. New medications were developed. Insulin was discovered. What does insulin treat? So insulin for diabetes. So this is just in the 1900s that they come up with insulin. Imagine before that. Y'all know where insulin, especially in the beginning, did y'all see in the video where they got insulin from? I think it was dogs. Like this video said. Anyways, but they use pig insulin still today to make it. Some of it is not human insulin. Sometimes it's synthetic, like they create it and make it. Depends on the type. But insulin is important because there's a few things. Sometimes people make insulin, but their body just doesn't respond to it. Sometimes people don't make enough insulin. Sometimes they just don't make it at all. So there can be any number of reasons why their own insulin doesn't work or they don't have enough. Antibiotics were developed to fight infections. So antibiotics is a very significant discovery of this time period. And then vaccines. So more and more vaccines. Polio vaccine, measles, all of those are still fairly new. New machines were developed. So the kidney dialysis machine, what does it do?
It does the job of your kidneys for you.
Yeah, it filters. Your kidneys are supposed to filter your blood, remove the waste. So, but it's not just like, oh, let me hook up to this machine for a few minutes, let me do its thing, and then be done. When people are on dialysis, it's usually they have to go 3 times a week, and it's usually 8 hours a day. So it's very, very time consuming and very kind of an arduous process of getting that done. But that was a very significant machine that was developed because otherwise, once somebody's kidneys fail, they only have a few days usually left to live because of that waste that builds up, and the blood essentially just becomes toxic, almost like poisonous. The heart-lung machine, you might know what that is?
Does the job of your heart and lung for you.
Yes, why would you do that?
Because your heart and lungs fail.
Well, not exactly. So you're close, though. You're right about the machine. So the machine, when you go in to have open heart surgery, they can't just, they're going to be working on you for a long time. They can't just stop your heart and expect you to just come back to life. They hook you up. They, working on your heart, but they hook your body up to this heart-lung machine, and it does the job of the heart and lungs for you. It's just you're hooked up for that time period, which allowed for transplants, allowed for open heart surgery when people needed it. So pretty significant too, very significant. Surgical and diagnostic techniques, lots of things that, once you got a diagnosis and it was like a certain death, and now there's this new, there's something new. There's something new all the time. 20th century, continue organ transplants. What are some organs that can be transplanted?
All of them.
Not necessarily all of them. Heart, we know that. Kidneys, liver, do what? We have a lung transplant. I don't hear about them very often, but we can have those. Those are kind of the main ones that you're about. Sometimes a liver can actually, you can even take a portion of the liver and it can grow to be used. And we have 2 kidneys, but we can live with just one. 20th century implanted the first artificial heart. We'll talk about that more in a second. Definitely an increased lifespan, right? We're going to see that jump significantly in the 20th century. And we did see it jump. Healthcare plans were developed to pay the cost of healthcare, something that was new in the 20th century. Medicare and Medicaid were programs that were developed to help people be able to pay for their own health care. Since people were living longer, there was more treatments, and treatments were more expensive than they've ever been, and needed a way to help people pay for it. And those 2 things in particular says mark the entry of the government into healthcare. HMOs provided an alternative to private insurance. So remember, HMOs are cheaper, but they have a lot more stipulations on them. And then hospice organized. So Fleming is one that discovered penicillin. Now notice he discovered it in 28. They didn't really start using it until the early 40s. They say that penicillin is one of the reasons we won World War II, because we're able to treat our soldiers with antibiotics. That was a broad spectrum. Penicillin is a broad spectrum antibiotic, which means it works on lots of different infections. And that's very significant. Probably one of the most significant discoveries in the 20th century, I would say, because it was so broad. If you've got a bad tooth and it's infected, you can get penicillin. Penicillin cures syphilis. Penicillin, you've got a sinus infection, you get penicillin for that. You've got a wound infection, they can give penicillin for that. Now we have, penicillin now, people have developed a lot of allergies for it. They don't use it just penicillin. They use a lot of derivatives like ampicillin or amoxicillin. You probably taken amoxicillin before or something. Paint bubblegum medicine to take for your infection. So, or strep throat.
These have taken all the time for strep throat. Because I think a year I had it caused it.
But that's a derivative of penicillin, so it's used very commonly and it covers lots of things. Salk and Sabine both discovered the polio vaccine, but we say both because they were working on it at the same time and kind of discovered it around the same time period. Saved many people from this virus. It was rampant in the early 20th century. I know my great granddad had polio, and I never met him. He was, he was like quite a bit older, but he had polio, and I can tell in any pictures I see of him, he had like a gimpy leg, and a cane, and he was shorter than everybody else, and that was what polio he had when he was a child. So that's what it had affected its growth, probably a growth plate, and then given him, he was crippled as well. And polio, we pretty much, we don't get vaccinated for that anymore. You don't even see it. Or do you?
I don't think they give polio vaccines.
Could be. Yeah, I think you do when you're ready. I'm thinking of smallpox is what I'm thinking of. Yeah, they still give polio vaccine. I'm like, I know they do. Yeah, I'll look it up in a minute. So definitely that one's significant. Crick and Watson describe the structure of DNA. You know what DNA is? Or your genes, that's what makes.
Deoxynucleic acid.
Yes. Deoxyribose nucleic acid. So they developed this model, this dimensional model, three-dimensional model of what DNA really looks like. Shared the Nobel Peace Prize, right? They figured out the genes, and we'll see later on about the genetic code. Christian Bernard performed the first successful heart transplant in '68.
Wasn't that in like South Africa?
I'm not sure. Jarvik created the first artificial heart. So they used it first in '82, and he lived for about three and a half months. And then the second one lived for almost 2 years. So not quite 2 year and a half. 21st century. The Netherlands became the first country to legalize euthanasia in 2002. Do you know what euthanasia is? Assisted suicide. So people, are near death and they don't want to keep living, and euthanasia is. That's what euthanasia is. Assisted suicide, basically, or it could probably include more things than just assisted suicide, and that's legal. Assisted suicide is legal in Oregon. We'll talk about later on in the year. The Human Genome Project identified all of the genes, the human genes, and mapped them out. Pretty intense project. The role of information technology. Everything we do is computer-based. Everything, even healthcare-wise, you're looking at everything's in the computer. All everything that is used is computer-based. It plays a huge role in healthcare at this point. Decreased heart disease. Why is that? Why do we have decreased heart disease now versus 20 years ago? What? Well, I think, we have less heart disease. I think that we have less because we're knowledgeable about it, right? Now we know. You eat a burger and fries every day for 20 years, you're probably going to have a heart attack, right? We know those things. We didn't know that 30 years ago because we hadn't seen the effects of that change in diet. Anti-smoking laws. So, right, 70s, 80s, it was a really cool thing to smoke. And then you see this intense rise in lung cancer and COPD and other smoking-related diseases. And now we know, right? We know the consequences of that. It just takes us some time to learn. Cancer treatments, stem cell research. You know what stem cells are? Probably hear that word a lot.
They can form any type of cell.
Yes. Stem cells are like little bitty baby cells that can, what they try to do is kind of make them, stem cells, like in an embryo, for example, haven't decided what they want to be yet when they grow up. Might be a liver, it might be part of the brain, might be part of the lung, whatever. So they're baby cells that haven't differentiated into whatever type of tissue or cell that they're going to be. So when they take stem cells, they can take stem cells like for somebody with leukemia. They take stem cell transplant because what's happening in leukemia is their body is creating this vast number of really immature white blood cells that don't do their job. Well, they're created from stem cells. So that's why they can take stem cell transplant from someone, plant it into the next person in hopes that their body will put out healthier cells or healthy cells instead of those baby cells that aren't doing anything. Aren't doing what they're supposed to be doing. So that's kind of stem cell, but it's like a little baby stem cell that hasn't decided what it wants to be yet when it grows up. And so their stem cell research, some of what they're trying to do with that is make it so that those stem cells, they can kind of push them to become a liver or to become a kidney or to become, to replace those areas. Pretty interesting. It gets in. You always get into ethical debate with stem cells because you have to really look at where stem cells come from. And the ethical part of it is a lot of it has to do with fertilized eggs or zygotes that are a few days old that have been unused. Maybe if somebody's trying to do in vitro fertilization or something. So that's where you get into the ethical dilemma is where do you get those stem cells? Where can you ethically get stem cells? And that's where you see that big debate in there. Potential for 21st century, right? Things that we hope for. Cures for AIDS. Now, AIDS is very, very treatable. Okay? Very treatable. It's just not curable. And they can get their markers, their viral markers, down to where they're not even recognizable. And they can get rid of it to that point, but it's still in there. And that's because that HIV virus basically plants itself into the person's DNA. It just injects itself in, so it's part of their DNA strand. That's a big reason why they, can't completely cure it. But it is treatable, just not curable. And they can, there's lots of medications to do that. And they're pretty intense meds, though. Cure for cancer, right? Again, treatable. Some are treatable, at least, depending on where it is and how advanced it is and so forth, but not curable per se. Heart disease. Genetic manipulation to prevent inherited disease. So that's something that they're looking at. And that's another ethical issue. How do they manipulate genes so that you won't get this disease that your parents might have? I don't know. There's lots of ethical issues. And I don't know how I feel about that. Well, I know how I feel about it, but make their own decision. Nerves in the brain and spinal cord are regenerated to prevent paralysis. So that's something else they're looking at. How do we regenerate neurons, right, to prevent, or not prevent, but how to
Stem cell.
cure? Stem cell is that's what they're doing right now. Still haven't figured all that out, but they're looking for that. Antibiotics are developed that don't allow pathogens to develop resistance. So what that's saying is that there's some bacteria that sometimes we come into contact with. Y'all ever heard of MRSA, MRSA, methicillin-resistant Staphylococcus aureus. So it's a bacteria that is resistant to antibiotics. You have to use these really, really, really potent antibiotics to get rid of it. And they've just gotten that way. One reason is that we don't take our antibiotics like we're supposed to. So we only take 5 days. So we feel better and we're like, forget the last 5 days. It's a prime way to make it so that the next time you get that bacteria, it won't work the same way. That medicine won't work the same way. You have to take more potent medicine. In average lifespan, we're up to the 90s-ish, 80s, 90s. And then this is the last guy on here. If y'all watched the Republican Party debate last night, he was on there. He's running for president. We're going to watch a movie about him probably about Thanksgiving-ish, somewhere around that time. He is famous for his surgeries to separate Siamese twins. He's a pediatric neurosurgeon, and he is, that says currently the director. That's not, I need to take the currently out there. But for a long time, he was director of pediatric neurosurgery at Johns Hopkins, which is one of the leading research hospitals in the U.S. Very renowned hospital. And he's a very good doctor, but he's a neurosurgeon. That means brain surgeries is what he specializes in, pediatrics, so on kids. And he did. You'll see in the video talk about this separation of these Siamese twins. They were attached at the head and he separated them. Here's the final hysterectomy, and talk about that in the movie too, whenever we get to watching it, which is a surgery basically removed section of the brain to stop these chronic seizures. That's it. Now he's running for president. Really, that's a really cool story. Anyways, any questions about that?